Early April 1945. The weather was abominable. It often rained hard and cold. Clothes are soaked, there is no time to dry off, and nowhere to do so, especially at night. During the day, the enemy withdraws almost without a fight, leaving one village after another. But at night, Hitlerites stop in settlements, organize defense and resist with such persistence that it is impossible to smoke them out of there without a serious fight. And in battalions of people, or as it is customary to say in the army, active bayonets, there are not enough. I have more soldiers in my battery than in the battalion I support, so I have to stop for the night in the field, in front of a village occupied by the enemy, and freeze all night, often in the cold rain. On April 5th or 6th, 1945, in the evening we come to a large village, which is spread along the banks of a small river. It rained all day long. Overcoats are swollen from moisture. The ground has spread. We are all in mud from head to toe. We are advancing along the asphalt road. Our infantry is rambling along both sides of the road. My guns are moving a kilometre behind us. Soon rumbled bursts of enemy mines from right and left of the highway. The battalion is deployed in combat order, a rare chain of soldiers, mercilessly cursing at the Germans, because we have to shave on the skeletonized arable land. Apparently the enemy intends to stop us on the approaches to the village. In any case, we can't do without a serious battle for the village. I indicate to the senior officer the place of the firing position of the battery, and myself with scouts and communicators move together with the battalion. The infantrymen are so tired that they do not run away even from enemy mines, but fall into the mud and lie there until the splinters whistle. Fatigue, apathy, whatever will be a familiar condition of a tired man. I feel a little better, some part of the way I rode on horseback, but now that the enemy has started mortar fire, I have to dismount. As soon as the battalion lays down for the night, we must select an observation post, extend the telephone link with the battery and prepare to fire. In the morning, the battalion must be supported by its fire from the guns. Judging by the bursting of enemy mines, the enemy does not see us and is firing at random, warning that today, for the night he is entrenched in the village, and does not intend to leave it until morning. And what can be seen in this gloom, drizzling fine rain and haze? Visibility of 200 to 250 meters. We moved forward another kilometre and a half. When mines began to fall nearby with a threatening hiss, we had to throw ourselves into a roadside ditch full of water and mud, cursing everything in the world. Soon tall trees, something like plantations, showed up ahead. They are to the right and left of the road. As soon as our infantry came to the boundary of these trees, machine gun bursts from the village, heard the rumble of engines, obviously armoured personnel carriers. Fountains of mud from enemy bullets rise near the chain battalion. The infantry is lying down, but I can't see where the machine guns are firing from trees, bushes and the night twilight, which began to thicken quickly, are in the way. I know from experience that the enemy will now maneuver their armoured personnel carriers along the outskirts of the village to create the appearance of a tight defence and stop our infantry. But the detachment does not think to move forward. With such forces we cannot defeat the Germans. In addition, the soldiers are dead tired, falling directly on the damp ground in the hope of at least a little rest. We have to choose an observation point, from which at least a little was visible the outskirts of the village in the morning attack, and we need to organize a targeted fire. The terrain is flat, there is no hillock or hillock anywhere. I came out to the battalion. Chain soldiers were digging trenches with small sapper shovels, not so much for shelter as to get into a trench, cover themselves with a cloak tent, and at least a little warmth and sleep. The battalion chain lies at the very edge of the field. Here is a row of trees, and immediately behind them begins a precipice towards the village, about 2 meters high, and then there is a steep descent, overgrown with trees and shrubs. At the bottom 200 meters away is the village. Even in the front chain of the NP is nowhere to choose. Observation interferes with trees and shrubbery. I call the squad commander, Sergeant Sotnikov, and give him the task with 2 scouts to cautiously go down the cliff and see if it is possible to find a place for the NP on neutral territory. A fine, cold rain is falling. We are standing covered with a cloak tent. Not far away, near a bush, the battalion commander and his entourage have stretched a small piece of tarpaulin and are settling down for the night. I and my soldiers stand waiting for Sotnikov, hoping that maybe they will find something suitable for the NP. It takes about 40 minutes before the scouts return. Sotnikov excitedly whispers to me that they found on the slope near the village of an empty stone bunker in the cliff. The entrance to it is closed with an iron door. From the bunker, it will be possible to keep watch over the village. There is sparse shrubbery. From our front edge to the bunker to 100 meters. It turns out that it is in the middle between the battalion chain and the village, where the Germans are. After thinking a little, I decide to go to the bunker and there to take up the NP. The Germans are no less tired than we are, and are unlikely to come in our direction at night. I informed the battalion commander of my decision and, of course, not a word about the bunker, otherwise the whole battalion would move there. The battalion commander asked to be more careful. After all, the Germans were only 100 meters away. I sent Diminsky to warn the company commander against the chain of which the bunker, so that in the morning they would not throw grenades at us when they went on the attack. Carefully down the cliff down, then between the trees and bushes we make our way to the bunker. It's cut into the bottom of the cliff. Only the entrance, a rather massive metal door, wide of 2 halves, protrudes from the ground. We stop, listening carefully to the darkness of the night. Everything seems to be quiet. Slowly, so as not to squeak, we open one leaf of the door and enter the bunker. It is quite high. Up to the ceiling is not less than 3 meters, in width not less than 5 meters. The walls and ceiling vault are lined with large cobblestones. The far side is lost somewhere in the darkness. It is at least 10 meters away. The door is closed, and I turn on my buzz light. The bunker is empty and clean. We settle down near one of the walls not far from the entrance. Telephonists connected the connection with the firing position and the division commander. The bunker is dry, not like the field. We open the door ajar, listening carefully to the outside sounds. In the village, to the outskirts of which is no more than 100 to 150 meters, you can hear the noise of muffled engines and the clanking of tank tracks. There is no doubt the enemy has tanks, and their shooting from a closed position cannot take them. Covered with a raincoat, I called the division headquarters. I reported the situation in the sense that we hear on the outskirts of the village the noise of tank engines and the clanking of tracks. The division commander advised to put at least 1 gun on direct fire, otherwise the battalion would be trampled in the morning at the outskirts of the village. I agreed with his opinion and decided to put 1 gun, and if we could find a place, both guns on direct fire, while it was dark. Bold idea, there is enough space for 1 gun near the bunker. There is a flat area near the entrance to it, and if we clear the shrubbery we can fire at the village. Where should I put the 2nd gun? Up there at the back, where the battalion is lying down. You can't. First of all, the trees are in the way, and the main thing is that the village lies below, and the gun can't fire from above, because the angle of inclination of the barrel is small. So we must look here. I decided to call Senior Officer Doroshenko and set him a task on the spot. I will inform the battalion commander when I choose a position for the 2nd gun. The door was covered, so that no sound would give away our presence. It was locked from the inside. I called Doroshenko and explained the task in detail. I don't say anything about the fact that we're in the bunker. I advise you to take the communication cable in your hands and use it to go to my NP. At night we can't find the NP any other way. Everything has calmed down. Everyone in the bunker quieted down, tired, dozing, only at the door scout on duty, listening carefully to the sounds of the night. By the time Doroshenko gets there, at least half an hour will have passed. We can rest. Suddenly, through my slumber, I thought that someone was standing near me. I turned on my flashlight bug, and the hair under my cap a puff. 3 Germans in overcoats are standing near me. We jump up quickly, grabbing our weapons. The Germans say in a loud whisper, "We are Czechs, Czechs." My heart was relieved a split second, and the irreparable would have happened. Naturally, I asked, "Where did you come from?" The door to the bunker was closed. It was empty inside, and suddenly there were 3 Czechs in half-military uniforms. They ask in the same whisper, "Are you Russians?" "Russians," I confirm that of course we are Russians. The Czechs throw themselves on our necks, that enthusiastically and joyfully embrace us, kiss us and even sob with joy. But I, although this sentimentality is to my liking, need to know where they came from. I ask the Czechs this question again. They keep repeating bros, and invite me to go to the far corner of the bunker. With 2 scouts I go to that corner. Part of the boulder from the wall of the bunker lies on the ground, and in the light of a flashlight we can see a manhole in the side wall of the bunker. When we took a cursory look around the bunker, there were no rocks here. As we later found out, the hole in the wall had been filled in. One Czech, apparently the oldest of the 3, invites me to climb into the hole. Elementary caution, and I suggest one of the Czechs to climb into the hole. My scout climbed in after him, and suddenly from there his joyful exclamation, "Comrade, combat, climb here." This is Kolya Kushenko, my dashing scout. If something surprised him, then there is really something unusual there. A little more scattered hole, and I climb through it. In the dim light of a few candles and my flashlight I saw, to my surprise, another part of the bunker, even larger than the first. By the quiet sound of many voices, mostly female, I could sense that there were a lot of people here. The Czech, who had climbed through the hole first, joyfully informed his fellow villagers that the Russian brothers were here, the Red Army had come. A crowd of people rushed to us, crying with joy, hugging and kissing. Their joy is genuine, sincere, warm. Here are mostly women, men, apparently only 3, whom we have already seen. As we were told later, the villagers are hiding here, which we have to storm in the morning. They treat us with bread, lard, eggs, wine, and so on. There is no end to the joy, especially among the young people. A few joyful minutes pass, but we have to do business. I call up the Czech who spoke to me first. I explain to him that it is necessary to organize a duty at the outer doors inside the bunker. The door must be bolted. If anyone knocks, do not answer anything and immediately inform me. I meant that Doroshenko should be here soon. The Czechs understand us, as you can understand their words, although they have many words similar to German. Some time passes, and in the bunker there is still jubilation of the local population in connection with the arrival of the Red Army, although we are here on neutral territory, and we can expect any trouble from the enemy. Enough time has passed for Doroshenko to arrive at my place, but he is not here, and in addition the connection with the firing position is broken. I'm sending a signalman to the line. At night, of course, it is difficult to restore the line of communication. The other, broken, end could be dragged away accidentally during the break. It takes at least an hour to restore communication. Once again I called Doroshenko to the firing position, reprimanding him why didn't he show up as I ordered. He answered in a sympathetic and ironic tone, "Comrade, combat, you have fallen into German captivity, and now you are trying to lure us there." At this time the commander of our division, Captain Savin, intervenes in our conversation. He, in my terms, says, "Heresy, we know that you and your control platoon were taken into German captivity. We understand that you have a German pistol at your temple, and you are forced to lure others into captivity. Be courageous, etc." In short, he educates me in the spirit of patriotism, not letting me utter a word. Then he informs me that he is sending an assault group with anti-tank grenades to our rescue, and that if the Germans do not free us, they will blow up the bunker. I try to explain that there is no captivity, that I am really in the bunker and on neutral territory. To make a long story short, we agreed that the assault group, having surrounded the bunker, will wait until I come out to them alone, and then we will come to an agreement. In general, the matter took a serious turn. The message about our captivity went through the regiment, division, etc. I called up the Czechs who were on duty at the door and asked, did anyone knock on the door of the bunker? They replied that there had been a knock, but no one answered them. I realized what was going on. Hearing the knock on the door, the Czech replied, "Ein moment" in both Czech and German. That means 1 minute. Hearing this, Doroshenko, of course, thought that it was the Germans and we were their prisoners, because the communication cable by which they came here was brought into the bunker. In general, it was not enough that we also beat each other for the pleasure of the enemy. I ordered the scouts to open the door and listen carefully into the silence of the night. Soon a faint rustle was heard. I half-voiced asked Doroshenko, "Are you?" He replies, "Aya." I told him, "I'll come out to you alone now, don't shoot." He understood, and I came out of the bunker and approached the bushes where the assault group was lying down. Then, without too much noise, everyone from the control platoon came out. When everything was clear, we went back into the bunker, and Doroshenko on the phone reported to the division commander about everything. He called me. Not hesitating in expressions, scolded me for frivolity with neutral territory. When I explained the situation to him, he agreed with me, grumbling that it should have been reported to him in advance, and so we made a lot of noise for the whole army. That was the end of the incident. Together with Doroshenko, we chose positions for both guns, and by morning they were here. One gun was placed right at the entrance to our bunker. We warned the Czechs in the morning not to be frightened by our shots. At dawn, when the battalion went on the attack, and German armoured personnel carriers met it with fire, my guns quickly destroyed them, and the battalion began to successfully liberate the village. The enemy retreats, we pursue him, not giving him the opportunity to break away. There is an ordinary, everyday front life. Although now, when many tens of years have passed after those events, it is difficult to imagine in what incredibly difficult conditions we had to conduct the offensive. Wet, hungry, dead tired from physical exertion and constant sleep deprivation, and if we add to this incredible nervous stress from the constant risk of being killed or maimed, then obviously we can imagine the state of soldiers and officers. However, we did not think about it. It was just no time. There were more specific tasks, and they had to be constantly solved. They did not allow us to relax. Somewhere in the middle of April 1945, continuing the offensive in the general direction to the northwest, to Prague early in the morning, the battalion, which I support, went down into a ravine and stopped for breakfast. The battalion kitchen stopped nearby, and soldiers with walks reached for breakfast. Here and I with the platoon control. The kitchen, having distributed breakfast, left and the battalion rested. Over the gully is a liquid fog. It hides us from the enemy, but we cannot see the enemy too. My soldiers devoured what was left of the battalion's breakfast in the battalion kitchen. Our divisional kitchen is God knows where, and we can't count on it. Soon behind us we heard the murmur of tank engines. The battalion commander said that at this line should be introduced into the Battle of the Tank Brigade. Soon the tanks moved to the attack. I thought that now the offensive will go more cheerfully. Tanks are approaching us. Suddenly, from the height where the enemy was, our tanks opened fire on the enemy battery. The shells are flying over our heads, but the battalion continues to rest, waiting for the tanks to come up to follow them in the attack. Suddenly our tanks came out of the fog and crashed into the resting battalion. The soldiers began to scatter. Several men fell under the tracks and were crushed. Several men were killed by machine gun fire. There were wounded. One tank rushed straight at me. I managed to roll aside, but the floor of my overcoat got under the tank's track. I rushed as hard as I could. The hooks of my overcoat unbent, and I managed to jump out of it before the tank turned around to dash us. We were dodging from the tank to one side or the other, threatening the tankers with our fists. Some of the soldiers are shooting at the tanks with a machine gun. The battalion commander with a Mauser in his hand is running between the tanks, tapping a stick on the armour. Finally, the tanks stopped. Obviously, the tankers realized that they were crushing their soldiers. The battalion commander shouts for the tankers to get out of the tanks and see what they have done. But the tankers, realizing that they could not get away with it so easily, did not get out of the tanks. In one tank, the hatch cover was lifted, and apparently the commander began to explain to the battalion commander that someone from the superiors who led the brigade into the battle informed him that our troops were not in front. In addition, the enemy gun opened fire, and the tankers in the fog did not realize that their troops were here. In general, the picture, even by frontline standards, turned out to be terrible. Several men from the battalion were literally torn by the tracks into bloody pieces mixed with mud. Several wounded men die of their wounds in front of everyone. Thank God my soldiers are all unharmed. Having swore enough, the battalion commander reported the incident to the commander of his regiment. The latter, promising to look into what had happened, ordered the battalion to attack behind the tanks and try to keep up with them. We continued the offensive in the same direction to Prague. Ahead is a large Czechoslovakian city of Brno. It is still about 30 kilometers away. The battalion is attacking another village The enemy put up stubborn resistance. In our direction operates a large enemy grouping of troops, numbering more than 1 million people, and a lot of military equipment. As it later became known, this grouping sought at all costs to delay the advance of our troops and give our allies, the Americans and British, as far east as possible to eventually surrender to them. The Germans were afraid to surrender to us, and certainly not without reason. Before returning the prisoners to Germany, they were forced to rebuild everything that had been destroyed. Of course, they did not rebuild everything, but they had to work after the war. Together with my scouts and communicators, I followed the battalion across a flat, open field, not a bush or a hillock anywhere, to take up a post. An enemy sniper obviously paid attention to my group. Several bullets whistled near me, and a few exploded at my feet. The sniper shoots bursting bullets, which, even if lightly wounded, inflict heavy wounds. There is nowhere to hide from him. To our left, 50 meters away, there is a small irrigation canal. The bank is steep, 1.5 meters high. We jumped into the water. It was waist deep, and the water was very cold, but there was no choice. Just jumped into the water, as on the place where I was standing just now, a cloud of bullet burst. Had I delayed just for a second, the bullet would have been mine. We waded through the water for 150 meters, trying to get out of the firing zone. Ahead on the right is a village. The battalion has already captured the outskirts and is fighting in the village. We jump out of the canal and run over to the outermost houses. I take a position on the roof of one of the houses, almost in the center of the village. Visibility is severely limited by other houses and trees near them. The infantry is fighting literally for every house, and it is difficult to determine where anyone is. I opened fire of the battery on the far outskirts, and then gradually pull the bursts closer to those places where the firefight is particularly strong. The shells are flying over the roofs with a screech, before the bursts of their shells no more than 300 meters. It is very difficult for us, artillerymen, to fire from guns when fighting in a populated area. Visibility is very limited. It is difficult to detect targets, especially since the enemy is always maneuvering. The front does not have a clear configuration. One group of soldiers moved a few houses farther than the neighboring group. The other, facing heavy fire, lay low, etc. In such a situation it is possible to hit your own, but so far everything is going well. The fighting in the village continues. Somewhere near, to my right, something is burning. The smoke covers the observation sector, interferes with firing. I ordered the scouts to find out what was going on and put out the fire. Soon I was informed that hay was burning on the roof of the barn, which was adjacent to the house where I was sitting. I ordered the hay to be dropped and the fire extinguished. Soon I got off the roof and saw the owner of the house, an elderly man of intelligent appearance, but in peasant clothes, digging something in the barn, on the roof of which the hay was burning. I asked him a question: why didn't he put out the hay? Because the house might catch fire. He waved his hand, mumbled something in reply, and continued digging a hole in the barn. I don't have time to deal with it, so I climbed up on the roof again. The battle for the village went on until late evening. It got dark. The battalion knocked the Germans out of the village and consolidated on its outskirts. Leaving the scout on duty at the base, I went downstairs. The scouts are hastily preparing a simple dinner: breadcrumbs, canned food, tea. We sit down to dinner. The host enters the room where we are having dinner. My first observations were confirmed: this is not a peasant, although he lives in the village and wears peasant clothes. The host, in a fairly passable Russian language, of course with a noticeable accent, invites us to go to the next room, which is obviously the living room. We are already happy that at last we will be able to spend this night warm and dry in the house. There is a small table set up in the living room. On it are bread, lard, potatoes, some appetizers. The host calls us to the table. We don't need to be invited twice. We sit down. The host takes out a dark bottle of wine and pours it into shot glasses. I give a sign to Sotnikov to get a flask of vodka. The host understands everything and asks me to drink his wine first, showing me the bottle. There is an inscription on it with convex numbers 1898. The host claims that this is the year the wine was made by his grandfather. I remembered the year the wine was made because it coincides with the year of my father's birth. The wine is dark cherry-coloured, quite thick and sweet. We drank a shot each and looked at each other. Our usual tableware was a soldier's mug or a tin can. We ate. Sotnikov started pouring vodka from a flask into shot glasses. The owner congratulated us on the liberation of the village, invites us to the box in the corner. An ordinary plywood box. He opens it and takes out busts of Lenin, Stalin and probably all the members of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks wrapped in something. There is also a pack of photos in a large waterproof bag. We recognize the owner of the house on some of them. He is taken in one group with members of the Politburo and other famous revolutionaries from different countries of the world. We are, of course, surprised by what we see. The host explains that he is a member of the Presidium of the Third International and before the war had been to the USSR quite often to attend the plenums of the Presidium. He said that he often met with Stalin and our other state leaders. We looked at the owner of the apartment with surprise. For us, Stalin and other leaders were something supernatural, unattainable, seemingly from another world. The owner said that this was his most precious possession, and he was digging it up when the hay on the roof of the barn caught fire. We sympathized, began to shake his hands, hug him, admire his revolutionary activity. It turned out that here he was hiding from the Germans under the guise of a peasant. People in the village knew it, but nobody gave him away. We drank another shot of vodka to his health. Here I have to finish my story, as I don't remember anything else. I completely blacked out, as if I had fallen somewhere. I woke up only in the morning at dawn. Sleepless nights and fatigue had taken their toll. We had a quick snack, thanked the hospitable host, and went after the battalion, which began to move forward. The enemy had withdrawn during the night and was not resisting. We are going without stopping. On our right, a few kilometers away, is a small town of Rusinov. It is away from the offensive line of our division, but the neighbouring division is far behind ours, and the battalion was ordered to take this town and hold it until the approach of the neighbouring division, while covering the right flank of our division. The battalion entered this town without a fight, occupied the near outskirts, and is not going to advance further to the centre. For my battery, the place on the outskirts of the village is not suitable. There is not enough space to place the guns, and there is no visibility towards the enemy. Houses and trees in the village interfere. To place the battery behind the battalion in the field is also dangerous. At the approach of the neighbouring division, my battery could be on the path of retreat of enemy troops. 2 guns left in the battery, we cannot cope with it, especially without infantry cover. I'm going with my scouts to the centre of the town. In the middle of the main street in the centre of the town stands a tall, massive church, further a small central square. There are also a few 2-story houses here. The rest of the houses in the town are 1-story. We are met in the centre of town by a small delegation, obviously the local government. They greet us cheerfully and apologise for the modesty of the meeting. The fact is that this town is still in the German rear, and our appearance here is unexpected for them. I was told that at the other end of the town, where there are no our soldiers, there is a fuel depot and German vehicles are constantly refuelled there. We looked along the straight main street in the direction the Czechs were pointing. Indeed, 1.5 kilometers away we could see a few cars huddled against the houses. There is also camouflaged enemy armoured personnel carrier. Cars, one by one refuelled, drove out of the city. The Czechs who met us invited us to a house for a small lunch. I expressed my doubts about the safety of such an event under the enemy's side. But the local chiefs suggested to put up an armed patrol. Soon 3 Czechs appeared, dressed in green overcoats of the Czechoslovak army, with rifles on their shoulders. I asked the senior to keep a close watch on the street leading to the fuel depot, and to inform me immediately if the enemy appeared. I did not want to offend the local authorities, who were not afraid to meet us in such a difficult situation. A small table with snacks and wine was set up in the house. No sooner had the Czechs made the first toast and drank with us than a Czech ran into the room and informed us that a German vehicle was coming from the fuel depot. We quickly jump out of the house and run to the church. The church walls are steep. There is no fence or any other shelter behind which we could hide. I shouted to the platoon commander Diminsky to run to the right side of the church and there to meet the German car, I ran to the left side of the church. The car should come from the right, and I can't see from behind the church where it is now. I have in my hands a brand new German trophy hand machine gun, which I will tell you about a little later. I tried on the machine gun to see how high the car could be. Before I had time to think something, as a German car of the type Dodge 3-4. With a covered body drove up and stopped near the church at the neighbouring house, literally 3 meters from me. There is a German standing on the footplate of the automobile. I pull the trigger, one shot rattles, and the machine gun does not fire again. The German standing on the step falls on the road. Another German jumped out of the car and ran into the entrance of the house. The car tore and rushed forward toward the battalion. By this time my battery had begun to take up a firing position just inside the town, not far from the battalion but ahead of it. There were vegetable gardens and a small area, or rather a vacant lot. The German car rushed towards the battery. There it was spotted and began to quickly unfold the gun for firing. The Germans saw my guns and turned 90 degrees to the right, where the field road went. I jumped out on the road, pulled the bolt of the machine gun, going to give a line on the car in pursuit, but the bolt in the rear position stood on the safety. There was not a single cartridge in the magazine, and I had none in reserve. It was useless to shoot from the gun. The fleeing car was already at least 200 meters away. While the guns were turned around, the car disappeared behind the outskirts of the houses. Deminsky ran up. Scouts from the machine gun gave a line in the direction of the car. It turned out that while Deminsky was running, where I pointed him, the German car had already passed and he did not have time to shoot at it. There is a trace of gasoline on the road. Perhaps I damaged the gasoline line. The car should not go far. My scouts had already taken 2 bicycles from the locals and with automatic rifles rushed after the car, which by this time had already left the town and, wagging on the road, was driving forward. I ran to the firing position of the battery. It is not excluded that other enemy vehicles could appear, because we, in fact, in the rear of the enemy. I quickly arranged the guns, indicated the approximate direction of firing, loaded the guns. At the church I put out my scouts to watch the street, which led to the gasoline warehouse, and timely warned the battery of the danger. Soon the scouts on bicycles returned and tried to catch up with the car. Indeed, a bullet from my machine gun hit the gasoline line. The car drove out of town and soon stood stuck in the road mud, in addition, and the gasoline apparently leaked out. By the time the scouts arrived, the Germans who had jumped out of the car were already far away. The car obviously was the headquarters. There, according to the scout story, were some boxes with papers and several suitcases. The scouts took 2 suitcases and brought them to me. When I opened the suitcases, they contained military uniforms. In one was a general's uniform of our army. In the other, it looked like a general's uniform of the Hungarian army. By this time, the deputy commander of our division, Captain Yurchenko, had arrived at the battery. Having learned about the trophies, he took for himself the general's uniform of our troops. I was left with the Hungarian one, an overcoat of green material of diagonal type with black velvet collar, tunic, pants, cap, etc. Soon I left for my NP, which was here, in the attic of a house, not far from the firing position of the battery, but ahead of the battalion. I examined the terrain. Visibility was limited. There were houses and trees all around, but the approaches to the town were visible. There was nothing suspicious. To the gasoline depot on the opposite outskirts of the city, German cars and ours are coming from time to time. In this case, if our cars approached, German cars at some distance, hiding behind the outskirts of the houses, waiting for their turn in general, something like gentlemanliness. I can't fire at them from my gun's direct fire. I can't see the target. The houses are in the way from a closed position. I can't. The smallest sight doesn't allow it. That is, the houses are in the way too. If you raise the barrels above the roofs of the houses that are ahead of the guns, the shells fly away for several kilometers, and lower it means you will hit the nearby houses. Here we observe at times the picture of refueling vehicles. The battalion commander knows about it, but does not show interest. He has to wait for the neighbouring division to return to his regiment. Here I can divert from memories and tell the story of the ill-fated hand machine gun, which I had at that time and failed at a critical moment. When Kalashnikov assault rifle appeared in the army after the war, I was surprised by its resemblance to the machine gun that I had in my hands in April 1945. I know that the designer of the Kalashnikov assault rifle, Mikhail Timofeyevich Kalashnikov, who received great recognition all over the world for the simplicity of its design and good combat qualities, was self-taught and had no special education. Before the war and in its first year he served as a sergeant in a tank regiment. After he was wounded, while recovering in the hospital, he took up construction in a primitive workshop. He studied the design of similar trophy weapons and eventually succeeded in designing an automatic rifle, which was adopted under the name Kalashnikov assault rifle. It is quite possible that he was also familiar with the new German lightweight hand machine gun, which appeared in the German army at the end of the war and fell into my hands as a trophy. The external resemblance was striking, and the device of such a machine gun, of course, I did not know. It was not up to that. However, I will return to the memories of the events that took place in April 1945 in Czechoslovakia, where we fought hard with a large group of enemy troops. The day was coming to an end. It was getting dark quickly. I, with my control platoon, was located in one of the houses of a small town, Razaniv, which is about 30 kilometers from the city of Brno. The yard of the house where we were located was surrounded by a rather high concrete fence. The night passed quietly, but early in the morning, as soon as it began to dawn, I was awakened by my orderly and told that the owner of the house had come to see me and wanted to talk to me urgently. I got out of bed and invited the master in. He was in a rather agitated state and informed me that the Germans had come. I thought that the civilian Germans who I knew lived in the vicinity of his house had come. An alarm flashed through my mind. Have my battery men done something wrong? I asked my host. What do they want with me? The owner shrugged his shoulders in confusion and muttered unhappily, and somehow anxiously, German soldiers. It quickly dawned on me that under cover of darkness the retreating German troops had entered the city. I quickly jumped out of the house, raising everyone on their feet to take a circular defense. Immediately I gave a command by telephone to the firing position to battle. I quickly went up to my position. In the city I can already hear rifle shots, machine gun bursts. Obviously our battalion has entered the battle. In the morning haze visibility is very poor. But you can see how the German soldiers are already between our house and the houses where the battalion is stationed. There is the main firefight. We were already in the near German rear. At the battery, which is about 200 meters away from our house, my soldiers took the defense and occasionally shoot back with rifles and automatic rifles. The Germans, having noticed our guns, bypass them. They know that there are no jokes here. One of the German grenades flew into our yard. A fragment wounded my horse. I have two of them. One is a parade horse from the Romanian Royal Stables. The other one is our formation horse, perfectly trained in cavalry commands. That's the one that was wounded. We hastily bandaged the horse and quickly took all the horses that were with me into the stable of the owner. The Germans, having come across our battalion and my battery, moved back to the center of the town, not wanting to fight with us. Soon on the other edge of the town rumbled shooting. This obviously came the neighboring division, in the band of which was this town. There the main battle unfolded. We had accomplished our task, and it was necessary to leave, not to get under the fire of their troops. By the middle of the day the battalion and my battery left the occupied positions and left the town. The enemy, tied up in battle with the approaching Red Army units, obviously does not notice us. In any case, we leave without a fight. We return to our division. By evening my column, following the battalion, enters the village where our regiment is defending on the outskirts. It was already dark when I and Yurchenko found the house where our division commander Captain Savin was stationed. Here nearby and the headquarters of our division. Let's go to the commander. Before that Yurchenko and I washed up and changed into trophy uniforms. Our uniforms had a rather shabby look. For many months we have not come out of the battle. We had no time and nowhere to wash and repair our tattered uniforms, and here we had new trophy uniforms. It's no trouble that it is not according to our status, that is generals. Let's go into the hut. Yurchenko in front, in a general's overcoat and papaka, and I in the back in the uniform of a Hungarian general. At the table in one undershirt sits Savin. The room is poorly lighted by a table kerosene lamp. Savin obviously had already had dinner, and not without a drink. In any case, he was already tipsy, and did not expect the arrival of distinguished guests in a general's uniform. To understand the situation, it should be borne in mind that during the whole war one had seen our general, the division commander, no more than twice, so the appearance of the generals was a complete surprise for Savin. He slowly rises from the table, and, as he was in his undershirt, introduces himself to the arriving superiors. We did not expect such a result. There was a slight hiccup. But Yurchenko quickly oriented himself, realizing the comicality of the situation. He waved his hand, entering the role of a general, invited Savin to sit down. Yurchenko stuttered quite badly. It was a consequence of the contusion, which we received on the Dnieper. In this situation, his stammer was even more noticeable. Savin stammered in indecision. Then, taking the lamp in his hands, approached us, looking at our faces. I was choking with laughter, and Yurchenko could not refrain from laughing either. Having realized that it was us, and not some generals, Savin swore heartily, asked us where we had come from, and where we had dressed up like that. We laughed, and Savin laughed with us. He invited us to the table, brought us dinner and drinks. We told him about the story of the general's suits. Savin began to try on the general's uniform. It was too big for him. Soon he offered us a bath. The bathhouse was hastily built in one of the sheds nearby. A fire was burning in the yard, and a barrel of water stood over it. The soldiers carried hot water in buckets to the shed, where there was straw on the floor, and everyone took turns washing. I don't even remember the last time I had a bath. At least not for several months. It was not always possible to wash properly. It was with great pleasure that we stripped off our clothes and washed ourselves with hot water. After washing, we had another drink for the night ahead, talked about the past battles and related events, and went to bed in the house. It was, as I remember, on the eve of May 1st, 1945, 9 days before the victory. Early in the morning, putting on my general's uniform, going to go to the battalion which I support, I found out that it was 5 kilometers away, and I had to walk through the forest. I was warned that there is no solid front line here. Separate scattered groups of the enemy are fighting their way to the west. We must be extremely careful not to run into such a group. In the paratrooper regiment there have already been cases of such sudden and fierce skirmishes, and there are casualties mainly because of carelessness. I leave the battery guns not far from the village where we spent the night. There they took a firing position. Communication will have to maintain by radio, although it is very unstable. With the control platoon, we go along the forest road to where the battalion is. Weapons at the ready, and we look carefully around and ahead, although visibility is limited to the nearest trees. The forest is pine native, tall and quite dense. The terrain is heavily rugged. This is the foothills of the Czech Tatras. I have a trophy 15-round German Walther pistol in my hands, and a Hungarian 9mm pistol in a holster on my belt. As I remember now, it was very similar to the Makarov pistol currently in service with our army. No matter how many times I tried, I could not make it out. Only after the war, when Makarov pistols came into service, I realized why I could not disassemble the trophy pistol. It was necessary to pull the trigger guard. I did not know about it. Several times my scouts sounded the alarm. We fell to the ground in readiness to immediately open fire, but everything went without firing. Evidently large groups of the enemy, avoiding roads and skirmishes with our troops, were making their way westward, and, having discovered us, were quickly concealed in the thickets of the forest. In one place we came across several corpses of our soldiers, evidently killed in one of the skirmishes with the enemy. Even as we entered the forest in the morning, fierce firing was heard ahead. Among the dead was a petty officer. On his chest, next to other awards, was the star of the hero of the Soviet Union. When we came to the battalion, I reported this to the battalion commander. I later learned that this petty officer was a sapper from our division. Arriving at the battalion, I went along the trench to the battalion commander. He opened his mouth in surprise when he saw the general's cap. But then, recognizing me, waved his hands for me to duck. The trench was shallow, dug hastily. "Where are you dressed up?" was his first question to me as we crouched in the trench at his request. I briefly told him the story of the general's uniform. He demanded that I change immediately. Enemy snipers were rampant here, and I would be the first target for them. The arguments were convincing. I changed into a tattered soldier's hat and the same vatnik that my scouts had brought. I took up an NP. Communication with the firing position is there, but very unstable. Today is May 1st, a holiday. The battalion commander congratulated everyone. We drank a sip of vodka, ate some breadcrumbs and went ahead. We are attacking the village, on the outskirts of which we are now. My battery fired several volleys on the village, and the battalion began to attack the village. The enemy, shooting back, retreated. Soon we entered the village. I sent scouts to the highest house in the village to occupy the NP. Here in the courtyard of this house was placed the battalion commander with his command. Soon my scout reported that the entire attic was full of bales of cloth. Battalion soldiers found a large number of the same bales in other structures of the house. The soldiers began to gut the bales. There were various good fabrics, like Boston and others. The soldiers tore off pieces, some velvet, some diagonal, some whatever they wanted, and wound them instead of shoelaces. I had to leave this yard for another NP. My battery moved to another firing position, closer to the front. The liaison officers stretched a cable telephone line. The communication worked steadily. The battalion was positioned on the far outskirts of the village and was not going to advance further. The soldiers celebrated May 1st as best they could. The weather was spring-like. It rained often, and there was the usual spring thaw. The front was moving all the time. The supply of food and forage was bad. The hay was also bad. Whoever could get what he could fed the horses with it. The neighbouring villages in our rear were already, as they say, united. In the village we entered in the morning we could buy oats. I sent SGT, Sotnikov, the commander of the reconnaissance section, to find where we could buy oats. Soon he came back and reported that he had made an agreement with the village headman, who promised to give us as much oats as we needed. I called Senior Officer Doroshenko at the firing position to send 2 riders with sacks for oats to our village. He soon informed me that he had sent Kaganovich and 1 more rider with him. Kaganovich was sent to my battery about 2 weeks ago. He was a colonel, demoted to private by the military tribunal. As I remember, he was the head of a test airfield at one of the aircraft factories somewhere in the Urals. He was demoted for some sins. I sent him to the gun crew as a rider. Each gun was carried by 6 horses, and for each pair of horses there was 1 rider. On the first 2 pairs of riders sit on horseback in the saddles, and on the 3rd pair, which is called the route carrier, the riders sit on the seat of the charging box. This is where Kaganovich was assigned. He went in a colonel's overcoat and papaka. Although no officer in the division did not have an officer's overcoat, all wore the usual soldier's overcoat. More than 2 hours passed, and Kaganovich is not there. I called again to the OP, but they do not know where he is. I was worried as if they had not been ambushed by some German group on the way, especially since the colonel's overcoat and papaka an attractive target for the enemy. But Doroshenko reported that Kaganovich changed into a soldier's overcoat and cap. Soon the scout on duty reports that on the farm, which is 1.5 kilometers away from the village where we are, in the direction of the enemy, heard firing from our machine gun and the German. I approached the stereotube. Visibility is poor, greatly interferes with the haze. It is impossible to make out anything there, but at times I can hear cues from our machine gun. I went down from the roof of the house, where I was at the base, and went to the battalion commander to find out what was going on. But he said that he had not sent anyone to the farm and did not know what was going on there. Besides, he had received an order to fortify himself in this village and not to move forward. I returned to my post. It was already dark when I was informed that the regimental counterintelligence detained 2 drunken soldiers with looted goods, and one of them was Kaganovich. I realized that in the farmhouse heard the work of my soldiers. Already later I learned some details of this incident from the interrogation of Kaganovich and the Uzbek soldier who was with him. Having come to our village, Kaganovich first of all refueled himself with wine, because the Czechs received us well and treated us well. And then their drunken fantasy led them to a farm, where they really dispersed the Germans' military guard sitting there, hung out a homemade red flag, which we saw in the stereo tube, thinking that the Germans wanted to provoke us, and added more drinks there. In a gunfight with the Germans, they drunkenly killed a civilian, and then foolishly picked up various junk in the houses with which they were caught. Payback was swift. A week later, our counterintelligence officer informed me that Kaganovich was shot by sentence, and the soldier was sent to a penalty battalion. This is such an unpleasant incident occurred in my battery on May 1st, 1945. But he was not alone. When we came to the village, there were 2 wagons with me, one personally mine, on which my orderly carried some clothes and food. There were also several cameras there, trophies that my scouts had collected, knowing that I knew something about photography. My general's uniform was also there. The village, or rather, the approaches to it, where we were on the morning of May 1st, the enemy shelled quite heavily from mortars. There was nowhere to shelter the wagons and horses. The battalion commander decided to send the kitchen and 2 of his wagons to the rear. My household also joined them. To the ordinarian I ordered that he and the wagons should stay with the battery commander until I called. On May 2nd, the battalion received orders to surrender its line of defence to the Romanian troops, who were to come up and concentrate at a specified place. The commander of our division gave me the task to provide with the battery fire, if necessary, a change of troops, and to arrive by the morning of May 3rd at the point indicated to me in the direction of Biernal. On the evening of May 2nd, I called the OP and asked the battery petty officer where my wagon and orderly were. The petty officer reported that he had not seen anyone, and that my wagon and the platoon's wagon had not appeared at the OP. When the battalion started to change shifts in the evening, I asked the battalion commander where his kitchen was located. He answered me that the kitchen had not arrived at the appointed place. And in the morning the scouts I sent out found the place where the tragedy had occurred. It was 2 kilometers behind us. Apparently, a small column of our wagons and the kitchen of the battalion ran into a German group that was making its way westward through the local forests. The road here went through the woods around a fairly large height. On the left a steep slope of the height, on the right a steep cliff. This is where our wagons were ambushed. Apparently the Germans hit them with a flamethrower. Under the cliff lay the charred corpses of my beautiful horses from the wagon harnesses. Charred parts of the wagons and property were scattered around. There were no soldiers riding on the wagons. The remains of the battalion kitchen were also found nearby. Early in the morning I took off from my NP and moved through the woods back to the village, where we spent the night 2 days in a row. On the way we passed by the place where the tragedy had occurred. It was worrying that the fate of the rider and the ordinarian was unknown. Soon we arrived safely in the village, and my guns arrived there as well. We had a little rest, had lunch, put ourselves, horses and equipment in order. In the evening the column of the division moved forward, on the road to the city of Brno. This is the 2nd largest city in Czechoslovakia after Prague. We pass the city of Brno late at night. We take the battle order, and in the morning battalions moved into the attack. Surprisingly, the attack goes almost without shots. The Germans withdraw without firing at us, and we also go without firing 500 to 600 meters from them. At times we stop. The battalion needs to tighten its fighting order, to give at least a little rest to the tired soldiers. We were moving to this line all night. The soldiers took out breadcrumbs, briquettes of porridge or soup concentrates from their bags, chewed, drinking from flasks. The Germans, seeing that we have stopped, also stop. We see them well, they see us, but no one shoots. Everyone is sick of war. Our soldiers shout to the Germans and wave their hands for them to come to our side. German soldiers shout something in response. Some hesitantly make attempts to walk towards us through the bushes separating our positions, but then in fright they rush back to their own. My scouts stealthily approached the German positions and, when several Germans made an attempt to cross to our side, caught them and brought them to me. They were elderly soldiers, looking around fearfully in anticipation of reprisals. They had been drafted into the army by total mobilization and were obviously in their 50s. They answer my questions with one answer: Hitler kaput. They don't know any other words. The soldiers give me some makhorka and breadcrumbs. The Germans calm down. I try to explain to them that at the first opportunity I will send them to the collection point of prisoners, and meanwhile they come with us. My communicators are not lost, because each of them has several heavy spools of cable. They are always pulling the line of communication with the firing position, sometimes stopping to connect the phone and check the serviceability of the line. And then there's the free power. Of course, they loaded the coils with German prisoners. They obediently carry the coils, and I pretend I don't see it. Until the evening the prisoners went with us, until some political officer saw them and demanded to release the prisoners. We continue the offensive. By the evening of May 8th, we unexpectedly met strong enemy resistance. Our infantry lay down, entrenched. I took a position on some barn. It was getting dark quickly. I went down into the shed. We laid down on a pile of lentils, poured directly on the floor of the shed, went to see the battalion commander, who is nearby with his headquarters. He informed me that a battle reconnaissance is scheduled for the morning here, obviously is a pre-prepared enemy defense line. We will break through in the morning. And since we know almost nothing about the enemy, we decided in the morning one battalion to conduct combat reconnaissance to take enemy fire. The other battalions should spot German firing points to then conduct a short artillery preparation and attack with the main forces. The enemy, as usual, is firing flares all along the front line, and occasionally his machine guns in the combat guard fire. By the middle of the night everything subsides, only the rockets continue to fly up into the night sky. Suddenly in the middle of the night my radio operator shouted something at the top of his voice. I woke up from this shout and swore at him. The enemy is 400 meters away from us and can hear in the night silence, and even plant a mine. But the radio operator shouts again, "Victory! Victory!" Soon the shots of all kinds of weapons flashed all along the front, and judging by the traces upward. Into the sky, now on our side as well, one after another flew up multicolored rockets. Our radio operators heard a broadcast that the act of surrender of Hitler's Germany was signed, which means the end of the war. The Germans were alarmed, but they obviously took our jubilation for a night attack and opened fire on us from all their firepower. It was not until dawn that the firing subsided a little. We were all greatly excited by the news of the end of the war. After all, we had waited almost 4 years for this hour. But soon came the command that combat reconnaissance is not cancelled. On our section of the front, the Germans are not going to surrender and will have to beat them to a pulp. It was the last attack of the Great National War. It was in the early morning of May 9th, 1945. To this day, the picture of this attack at times stands in my eyes, in my memory. I wanted to tell about this attack in more detail. Early morning of May 9th, 1945. Cloudless sky, warm spring air does not move. It is quiet, nature is happy to awaken, and it seems blasphemous the very thought that near lurks a deadly danger. The sun has just emerged from behind the horizon, illuminating the tops of the pine forest, on the edge of which our front line passes. The enemy trenches from ours about 300 meters away, on small heights overgrown with small bushes. Between our trenches and the enemy is a bright green field, obviously winter crops. The thick sprouts are covered with dew. In the forest began its cheerful roll call of birds, rejoicing in the sun warmth, the beginning of the day. There is a sense of serenity in everything. I sit with my scouts and telephonists on the edge of the forest in shallow trenches, hastily dug by soldiers. Not far away, the battalion commander and his entourage give the last instructions before the attack. To the front trenches, where the soldiers of the battalion are lying, about 50 meters. They are talking in low voices, seemingly afraid to break the serene silence of the early morning. The forest we are in is pristine. It looks more like a well-maintained park than an ordinary forest. Here in Czechoslovakia, like everywhere else in the West where I have visited and lived for many years, the forest has a touching attitude. Nowhere do you see a broken tree, falling branches or trees, much less any garbage. It seems that no one has been here before us for centuries. No man has ever set foot here. Everything is carefully tidied, and somewhere we can see neat little stacks of stacked branches and remnants of trees. Our trenches, with their bright yellow sand berms, seem sacrilegious in this pristine land. As the soldiers stir in the trenches, they are quietly preparing for the attack. Weapons are being wiped clean, magazines are loaded with ammunition, grenades are being prepared. Officers clarify the direction of the attack, landmarks, signals, etc. Soon the attack. We have to silently, without a single shot, suddenly rise to the attack, to call on themselves the fire of all kinds of enemy weapons, so that the other units, which make up the main forces of the division, were able to detect fire points and suppress them, and then already attack the enemy. Our division approached this line at night, and the nature of the enemy's defences we do not know. This method of attack is obviously the most unpleasant. We have to attack almost blindly, not knowing the enemy's forces. One must set oneself up as a target for the enemy, and for many it is certain death. Soldiers, and we also understand it well as the necessity of it. The choice has fallen on our battalion, so it is our fate. Of course, unpleasant feelings clutched in the chest and mind of all who wants to die when the war is officially over. It is ridiculous and offensive. Tense silence, only quiet conversation, and the fiddling of soldiers preparing to attack. I look carefully through binoculars into the distant bushes. Enemy trenches are visible there. There is no continuous trench, which means that the enemy defence was taken hastily and hardly had time to properly create a system of fire. I share these considerations with the battalion commander. He says, not without reason, that 2 enemy machine guns will be enough to put down the rest of the battalion. His mood is heavy, he can be understood the end of the war, and the soldiers will surely die under enemy bullets. And we cannot avoid this fate. We officers have no advantages over the soldiers in this regard. Rather the opposite, both machine gunners and snipers are primarily hunting for officers without a commander. The army is very difficult to resist the enemy, especially in the offensive. He does not yet give any signs of anxiety. This is good for us. It means that for some time our attack will be a surprise for him. It would be good to run to his trenches, and there he cannot resist the paratroopers. Unfortunately, this is unrealistic. The enemy also keeps surveillance, and of course will detect us before we get to him. The last minutes before the attack. Everyone, without giving any sign, in his heart hopes that he will be missed by an enemy bullet, but just in case he says goodbye to his relatives and friends, remembering them before the attack. Everyone's faces are serious, even the jokers are hushed. Not up to jokes, there is a difficult and dangerous work. The time of the attack is approaching. There are only minutes left. The battalion commander stands up in full height and, addressing us, says, "Well, men, let's go." Then he gives a command to the battalion Slavs attack forward. The soldiers of the battalion amicably rose to their full height. The chain menacingly bristled with bayonets, stern faces of the soldiers, silently going into the attack. The enemy is suspiciously silent. What is it decided to let us get closer, and then shoot the battalion in cold blood? Or he hasn't detected us yet. We've gone 20 paces. 30. Soon the silence of the morning was cut by the choking, some frightened crack of the enemy machine gun. Someone fell killed or wounded, someone lay down, and then the voice of the battalion commander, picked up by company and platoon commanders' attack. Forward, Ura the battalion seemed to shudder, exhaling a polyphonic Ura. Hooray! The chain moved forward at a run. Suddenly a mighty roar of hundreds of voices erupted behind us. Ura, the entire front of the division, as far as we could see it, jumped out of the trenches and moved after us. The unforeseen happened. The soldiers of other battalions couldn't stand it, seeing their battle comrades going into the attack to fight the enemy to the death, the last attack in this war. Here it is, the soldiers' loyalty to the front brotherhood, without slogans, without unnecessary pathos, the impulse of the soldier's soul, coming from the heart. Comrades are in trouble. The enemy will concentrate all his fire on the liquid chain of the battalion, and hardly anyone will survive. And if the whole front is going to attack, then there is less danger for everyone. Hardly any of us thought about it at that moment. Some unknown force pushed the soldiers out of the trenches without any command. Over the field, there was such a formidable roar of Ura, which in all the long years of the war and dozens, if not hundreds of attacks I had never heard. The enemy machine guns were choking. It seems that the soldiers could not stand it. They would lie down under fire. but a formidable avalanche of Soviet soldiers with some inexpressible persistence, determination, unstoppable and swiftly moving forward. Someone falls down, hit by an enemy bullet, someone lies down under enemy fire, but carried away by the general impulse, overcoming fear, gets up and runs after his comrades. Up to the enemy trenches 100 meters. The formidable Ura is not silent over the chain of battalions. Suddenly, one by one, the enemy machine guns are silenced, only mines continue to rumble somewhere behind the chain. The enemy could not withstand our attack. Throwing weapons, enemy soldiers jump out of the trenches and, looping and looking around, run away through the bushes to their rear. Some with raised hands and inexpressible fear in their eyes, pulling their heads into their shoulders, waiting for their fate. Here is the enemy defense. I catch myself in the fact that I, along with everyone else, shouting hurrah, hurrah. We're skipping the German defense. We keep moving forward. We need to consolidate the success, not to let the enemy come to his senses. Our soldier is so resilient. German soldiers have just been firing, and now they stand with their hands up, and to any question they have one answer: Hitler kaputt. One of the soldiers on the move tries to make conversation with a prisoner in some improbable language. Here they treat the prisoners with makorka, and then wave their hands for them to go to our rear, to the assembly point. The soldiers are catching German soldiers in the bushes, who from fear did not dare to surrender at once, and now are confused where to go, forward or backward. More than an hour has passed since the attack began. The enemy, not resisting, continues to withdraw, rather to take their feet away. The road to Prague is open. They yesterday began an uprising against the German occupiers. Our radio operators have intercepted the appeal of the citizens of Prague, asking them to help faster. Hurry to Prague. We move all day and all night with short breaks. The soldiers are tired to the point of exhaustion. We manage to rest, or rather to sleep for 2 hours in turn on the wagons. My horse was tired too. In the middle of the night I sent a scout to the tail of the battery column with the order that the foreman send a substitute horse. Soon I moved to the substitute horse and sent my horse to the foreman, let it rest. It was dark night, the sky was covered with clouds. My battery is ahead of the battalion, which lagged behind by 2 kilometers. There the soldiers are on foot. I ride at the head of the column, ahead of our troops are not. At times I fall asleep in the saddle, but I wake up quickly, as if someone pushes me in the chest. Next to rides Diminsky with scouts, who also dozed off. The road is asphalt, smooth, and the monotonous ride puts me to sleep. Approaching dawn, according to the map ahead of a major population centre, a small town, up to him about 5 kilometers. It is necessary to pull up the column and be ready for any surprise. I decided to go around the battery column, to wake up the sleeping soldiers, to pull up the stragglers. I spurred my horse, but it suddenly jumped up, almost throwing me out of the saddle, and howled like a calf. What's the number? I looked closely. My horse's ears were 2 or even 3 times longer than a normal horse's. I wiped my eyes, the same picture. I got off the horse, looked at its head with long ears with amazement, looked back, and it had a calf's tail. What a scarecrow. I pinched myself once more to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but everything was fine. Then my scouts arrived, looking at my dewlap, laughing. Soldiers from the gun crew came up and were also looking at the gimmick with surprise and laughter. One soldier, an Uzbek by nationality, told me that it was not a horse, but a mule, a mixture of a donkey and a horse. It was not enough for me to ride it into the city. I called the foreman and asked, in which zoo did you get this stuffed animal? He guiltily justifies that somewhere along the road they took some trophy horses. Obviously among them was a mule, but it was dark, and they did not pay attention to him, so he came to me. We had a good laugh. I took off the mule's saddle, gave him a kick in the ass and moved to my rested horse. For a long time afterwards my scouts teased me about how I garcetted on the donkey. A good laugh is a release for nervous tension. We continue moving forward. It has already dawned, the clouds have parted, a warm sunny morning has come. Ahead in 1 kilometer from us we see the outskirts of the settlement. Wait for the approach of infantry long. I send forward Diminsky with scouts to find out the situation. With binoculars carefully examine the outskirts. I didn't find anything suspicious, but war is war, and for us it's not over yet. Diminsky and his scouts are approaching the outskirts. I carefully observe them. Everything seems to be calm. Diminsky gives a conditional signal, no enemy. The battery column continues to move forward. While we were moving, on the outskirts of the city gathered quite a large crowd of locals, waving at us, shouting something. We come closer, Diminsky rides towards us, and reports that, according to the locals, the Germans left yesterday. We dismount and walk towards the crowd of locals. In front, a fat man, twice as fat as me, runs straight at me with open arms. I take a step to the side, and he piles on Diminsky, who was walking behind me. There are cheers of joy from the locals, hugging and kissing us. They're giving us something to eat. I decided to stop the column and wait for the battalion. I should have a rest and at least an hour of sleep, but the genuine, sincere joy of the locals does not give such an opportunity. Everyone, especially women and girls, want to touch our hands. They are chirping happily. There are few men. We are treated with wine, cigarettes, unusual for us. Lively, joyful conversations, someone is already singing. The song is picked up by the locals, the well-known Russian Katyusha. More than 2 hours passed while the battalion approached, and we moved forward, escorted by kind-hearted residents. We passed the city without stopping, faster forward, to Prague. In the afternoon we passed the town of German Brod. Our aviation worked well here. We pass a military airfield. This is a graveyard of German military airplanes. Many are broken. Others have their noses in the ground, tail feathers back. Some are still smoking. The weather is perfect, sunny, warm, the trees have blossomed, spring is raging. We pass by some station. On the tracks is a military train with military equipment, obviously an artillery regiment. It has not even had time to unload, and was hit by our aviation. On the platforms, guns and new tractors, cars like American Dodge 3-4. Someone of my subordinates suggested that on these cars we would quickly catch up with the Germans. I had a bold idea to take these tractors. In the battery found tractor drivers, combine harvesters, but there are no chauffeurs. But it's decided, done. We're taking the trucks off the platform. They don't need to be refueled, the gas tanks are full. We harnessed our horses. I ordered the petty officer and his men to wait for the rear of the division and move with it. Hooked up their guns to the cars and forward. Scouts from somewhere brought me a light car, a floating all-terrain vehicle. In the military school we were taught to drive a tractor. Its control was lever control. Like a tank you need to turn to the right, pull the right lever, to the left lever, but here you have to turn the steering wheel. My car is trotting along the road to the right or to the left, and it is trying to go into the ditch. In general, I'm not a very good driver, and the other cars are desperately looping all over the road. One is already in the ditch on its side. The soldiers are laughingly pulling it out of there. They laugh, but it doesn't take long to maim people. Someone suggests the idea that we should take German prisoners as chauffeurs. On the outskirts of the city there is a collection point for prisoners of war. I send there one of the experienced soldiers. Soon they bring the captured chauffeurs, all of them in black overalls. I put them in the cars, and it started, except for my car. The German mumbles something, spreads his hands. I realized that the engine was defective, it was leaking oil. There's no time to repair it. I left the car near the shed of some Czech and went ahead. By evening we stopped in some forest. It is pristine, as if someone had cleaned it specially for our arrival. However, all forests here are like that. We settled in for the night. All the prisoners were put in one place, under a big tarpaulin. I put an extra sentry near them. Early in the morning, the sun had not risen yet. The sentry woke me up and said that someone had come to see me. I climbed out of the cabin of the car where I was sleeping and saw a regimental counterintelligence officer with machine gunners. He asks, "Where are your Vlasovites?" I don't understand his question, what Vlasovites? Then he says, "Where are the prisoners who sat on the cars as chauffeurs?" I realize what the matter is and explain that they are German prisoners. He claims that they are Vlasovites. I showed him where they were sleeping. He pulls down the tarpaulin and gives me a command, "Come on, you bastards, get up." The chauffeurs jumped up and stood with their heads down. I was surprised that while we were driving yesterday, none of them spoke a single word of Russian, and we were sure that they were German prisoners, but it turned out that they were Russians from the army of the traitor General Vlasov. The counterintelligence officer reproachfully told me that I had made a dangerous blunder, that they could have cut us off at night and run away. All in all, an unpleasant incident. The prisoners were taken away, and we were left without chauffeurs. We had to switch to horse-drawn traction again. Moreover, the regiment commander, having learned that I had collected the vehicles, ordered to hand them over to the regiment and to pull the guns by horses, as it was supposed to be according to the staff. Soon a column of the division came up, horses were harnessed to the guns, and we moved forward again to Prague. A wide asphalt highway to Prague. It is all packed with our troops. It's the first time I've seen such an enormous amount of troops. Cars with guns, Katyushas, anti-aircraft guns, staff cars, transport with ammunition and property are moving in a continuous stream. The whole strip of road is occupied by columns, going parallel routes. No oncoming traffic, only in one direction, to Prague. On both sides of the road, in a continuous ribbon moving tanks. Further along the field are columns of cavalry. In the air now and then our airplanes are whizzing by, and also to the west. Impressive picture of the power of our troops. Sometimes on the roadside there are columns of captured Germans. With fear and amazement they look at this hulk. In 1941 to 1942, they walked briskly on our land, demonstrating the power of their army. Now it is our turn. However, our soldiers have no anger towards the prisoners. We understand that it was not by their own will that they went to fight against us. One early morning, when the highway was still free of troops, the column of my battery was on its way. Suddenly I see that a column of wagons is coming ahead, and judging by the horses they are Germans. Their horses are powerful with short tails, just in case the scouts prepared weapons. When the column came closer, to my surprise, on the first wagon I saw my driver, who disappeared on May 1st, when I sent my wagons together with the battalion kitchen to the rear, and they fell into a German ambush. It turned out that he had been taken prisoner then, and now he himself had declared the Germans with the wagons his prisoners and brought them to us. Of course it was an accident that it was his battery that he met. Anyway, we replenished our stable with trophy horses and wagons, and the captured Germans were sent alone on foot to the assembly point. The avalanche of our troops was moving unstoppably in the direction of Prague. Tanks of the First Ukrainian Front from Germany have already arrived there, but there are no infantry, and without infantry it is difficult for tankers alone to consolidate the victory. And Prague is included in the zone of action of our Second Ukrainian Front. We still have 2 or 3 daily crossings to go to it. One of the days I was searched for by a messenger from the regiment headquarters with the order to come to the Chief of Staff. I was at a loss to guess what was the matter, had the counterintelligence officer blown it about the Vlasovites. The headquarters is not far away. I went there on horseback. Soon I found the Chief of Staff of our regiment, Major A. T. Pugak, reported to him about my arrival. He asked me how things were in the battery. I reported, and he in turn informs me that by order of the regiment commander I was appointed Chief of Regimental Intelligence, with what he congratulated me and ordered the battery to surrender to Senior Lieutenant I. Why? Kulikov, this is my frontline comrade. Back in 1943, in the summer on the Northwestern Front, I was assigned to accompany young lieutenants who had arrived from schools to our division. Among them was Kulikov. He had just returned from a course of battery commanders. The transfer of cases did not last long, and the next day I already began my new duties. On May 12, 1945, the parts of our division reached the Sazawa River and concentrated near the town of Bezdikov, 50 kilometers southeast of Prague. Our combat operations against the Nazi troops ended at this line. On May 14th, parts of the division, having made a 35-kilometer march, concentrated in a forest reserve near Prague. On the same day in the evening we celebrated the Day of Victory. A modest dinner in the front way, instead of tables, shell crates, instead of glasses, tin cans, but our joy was boundless. Almost 4 years of hardest trials and losses, incredible tension of physical and moral forces, long and difficult roads of war, dotted all over the earth with the mass graves of our fighting comrades. We recollected about all this at our festive dinner. We recollected about it in the post-war years, when the veterans of our division, led by our permanent chairman of the council, hero of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant General Ivan Ivanovich Gromov, gathered for the next meeting in Ukraine, where we fought, and in Moldova, where we also had a chance to fight, and near Stara Russa in the Novgorod region, where in the forests and swamps we fought the enemy, and in Moscow, the capital of our state. With the first toast and a minute of silence, we always remembered our fighting comrades who remained forever on the front lines. There were many exciting meetings with the local population when we visited the mass graves of our fellow soldiers dear to us. In a protected forest near Prague, where the government docks were located, we stayed for about 2 weeks. A long-awaited serene vacation, we blissfully relaxed. Sometimes we went out to the edge of the forest, and from here we had a good view of Prague from the heights on which it was situated. Below came the streets filled with jubilant people, the houses drowned in the green of the trees, the city streetcars. It was all a wonder to us. We could not believe that the war was over, that we did not have to dig trenches and take up firing positions and observation posts. To some extent we felt insecure, we were so used to peaceful life. We tried not to appear unnecessarily in the city, let the people rejoice. But the people of Prague quickly found their way to us. Every day we were visited by photographers. We owe it to them that we still have photos of those days, where we are pictured with our friends from the front. Official and sports meetings were organized. Even a soccer match took place. Czechoslovakia's national team, the national team of our division. And although the score was 2-digit in favor of the Czechs, but the overall result was extremely positive. People wanted to see us and understand how could we defeat such a strong enemy as Hitler's Germany. No army of other countries was able to offer any serious resistance to the Nazis, and only our army, our soldiers and officers who were here with the citizens, were able to defeat such an enemy. This was interesting for the citizens of Prague, and they treated us with genuine joy. We paid them back in kind. Soon I was summoned to the headquarters of our 53rd Army, where there was a 3-day gathering of intelligence officers of divisions and regiments. The results of the battles were summarized, and at the same time we were introduced to the organization of the armies of the United States, England, France, arguing that we should know our allies. At the same time we were also taught the organization of the Japanese army, without explaining why we needed it. We did not give it due importance, and only much later realized what the matter was. To our surprise, it was announced to us against our receipt that we were not to divulge to anyone what was discussed at the training camp.